Welcome to This Week in Heresy, Episode 10, Does God Hate Your Body? With our guest via Skype, Ragen Chastain. Hi, Ragen. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I've been a fan of your blog for quite a while, and I've been reading your blog for a couple of years now, actually. I think more than that. I don't know, but for a while. Yay. And I've always really liked your view of, it's your body, do what you want with it, basically. And it really inspired me to write you when I was doing my papers a couple years ago in 2012, because I did a couple of papers on one on sexual abuse and eating disorders and theology, and one about a workshop for clergy. And I just want to publicly thank you for helping me find resources for that.
Oh, thank you for doing the work. I'm glad I could help.
Awesome. So you recently wrote about religious groups doing like kind of Biggest Loser-y type health, quote unquote, health related programs. And I know I've been advocating myself to have churches not do these things. And why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what you found?
Sure. So it came about, I do a column for Misfit magazine, and it was their faith and spirituality issue. And so they asked me to pitch some things, and I asked to write about religious leaders who sold diet plans and weight loss plans as part of their religion. Mm-hmm. And so it was something that came about because I get readers a lot who talk about how they're oppressed because of their body size within their church. Mm-hmm. And so I started to research this and found that there were some religious leaders making actually quite a bit of money doing this. And I think, to me, the thing that was the most egregious was the idea that body size, in addition to the way our society suggests that body size shows like how much willpower you have and how intelligent you are and how good a person you are, then it crosses over into religion and spirituality to where it shows if you're successful at practicing your faith and if you're a moral person. Mm-hmm. These diets said things like, if you are fat, then you're disobeying the first commandment because you're not honoring God with your body. And I just think that was so dangerous and so damaging. And so such an issue when we're talking about the church leaders making money selling these books and these programs.
Oh, absolutely. And, just the spiritual damage alone, money aside, that I have my issues with the whole big box church thing, but, whatever. But the idea of doing spiritual damage in the name of health and then equating your morality to your body size is just a huge problem to me. Right.
And that in a world where fat people are constantly stereotyped and stigmatized and oppressed, to not have your church to go to be a safe haven from that and a support and, a help to you, but rather to go and be sold a diet program by a pastor who says that, you're obviously not honoring God because of the size of your body, and to just heap oppression onto you from a place that should be the most supportive place that you go.
Oh, absolutely. And I totally agree. And if you're trying to foster community, you're excluding people just because of the language that you're using and the way that you're approaching body size.
Right. And, I found some language that equated a fat body, with, it's a sin, or equated it with gluttony, or just in general a sinful state. And I think that's incredibly problematic, because I feel like if you're trying to create community with your church and create a place to support people and help them worship, then creating a situation where them showing up proves that they're not doing it, quote unquote, right, makes it pretty likely that they won't show up.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And the funny thing is, if you look at scripture, particularly New Testament scripture, Jesus was a glutton. Jesus drank, he hung out with people and, and partied pretty hard. I mean, come on, water into wine, right?
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of it is, in my brief study of religion and spirituality, I find that religions often reflect the prejudices of their time. And I think that this is often an example of that. Just, we've got this anti-fat hate. And so it sort of gets picked up as part of religion and then regurgitated as truth.
Right. And, and also, it's been a long time that this idea of your body is a moral billboard of how moral you are. Because in my papers, I realized, it goes back to the church fathers. Specifically, the ones I specifically looked at were Augustine and Aquinas and a few others. And, it was basically the body is bad. You're not following God. You're not following Jesus. You're not following God if you give in to the lusts and the sins of the flesh, which includes the table and sex. And it's like, but if you look at Jesus, he doesn't even say that. He only has really one prohibition, and that's around marriage and divorce. And it's just like, okay. But it does show where this comes from. And I think people forget just how much religion has played a part in fat stigma.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to this sort of like my issue with them making money on these programs is that they're not shown to work at all. There's not a single study of any diet where more than a tiny fraction of people have succeeded at long-term weight loss. And in most of those studies, success is defined as losing 2 to 5 pounds, which is an amount I could lose right now with a loofah and a good haircut.
Right.
They're selling these programs and they're saying, you'll know that you're practicing your spirituality correctly when you follow this program and lose weight. But the truth is most people will lose weight short term and gain it back long term based on all the research. And so they're setting their parishioners up for failure, and they're making tons of money to do it. And I just don't find that to be a particularly spiritual practice.
Yeah. And, that for failure, and then also dovetailing into eating disorders as well. People, I've known people who will fast excessively in order to be more spiritual. And and some people really shouldn't be fasting. Like I know I would like to do fasts again, but I'm at a place health-wise where I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, for a lot of people, fasting can be really difficult. And I know there are a lot of people who do sort of alternatives to fasting in terms of like choosing one thing or several things that they're not going to eat or what, like there are some options. And I think that sort of, if we weren't talking about it from a weight loss perspective, but from a spirituality perspective, we'd have more options available. Right. And options that would make sense and perhaps not be so triggering to those with predispositions toward having an eating disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, people also miss the social justice aspect of this as well. Because, first of all, people can afford to buy these programs if they've got the money to do so. And never mind the cost of food, And then, if you're talking to minority people, to the African-American community or to the Latina community or to these other communities, if you're talking especially to poor people, and, then you're going into food deserts and lack of places to get fresh food.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think sort of as usual, oppression hits people of color, people of low socioeconomic status more. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that, and by interesting, I mean horrifically sad and terrible, is that several years ago, some studies were done and they found that women of color, and specifically Black African-American Latino women, were more comfortable with their bodies at higher weights. And so what the government set about doing was stopping that. And specifically trying to lower the self-esteem of fat women who were Black, African-American, Latina. And the churches were a place that played a part in that, in saying like, we need to be a healthy community. And like, part of that is to be at a quote unquote healthy weight, which, like there's a weight that you reach and then you're immortal till you get hit by a bus or whatever. But, and so, in those communities, it's important to know that it happens because of racist infrastructure, but in some cases it happened on purpose.
Yeah. And, I've seen it because I go to a primarily African-American church. So I've seen the interaction of this where, they talk about, diabetes and all this stuff in terms of weight loss. And it's like, this isn't, you got to read the studies. This isn't connected in that way, but it's, it is a social justice matter of food access.
Yes.
And, I've confronted pastors on this saying, listen, you can try and say that your pastors must lose weight, but what are you really telling them?
Yeah. And are you telling them to do something that nobody can prove is possible for a reason that nobody can prove is valid?
Right.
Right. Which is sort of what weight loss is at this point. I mean, I think that in as much as we've become confused as a society and thinking that public health means making fat people's bodies the public's business.
Right.
And that's so far from the truth. I think public health is about making as many options and as much information and as much accessibility available to as many people as possible, and then letting them make their own choices and respecting their own choices.
Right.
And so I think that, when we get into saying, well, we need to control people's body size, for their own good, and we need to make them feel bad about themselves for their own good, like maybe they'll hate themselves to health, is really, really problematic, and especially when it's coming from a church leader.
Right. Do you think that this stems from the way patriarchy works in our society? Because the way I've always seen it is that this whole idea around the moral center of weight loss, I guess you could call it, whatever, is that, you're little stupid children that don't know what to do with yourselves. Especially women, women and like transgendered people, anybody who doesn't fit the male thing.
Right. I definitely think patriarchy plays a part. This is, although fat men definitely face weight oppression. Studies show again and again that fat women face more oppression. And part of that is that, women are held to that male ideal. And I think what happens is it kind of gets all like mixed up into a slurry, right? So people say, oh, I'm doing this for your own good because you need to be healthy. But what they mean is you need to conform. You need to not make me uncomfortable by being fat and happy being fat or whatever. And, and this definitely isn't about the fact that like, I think every woman should appear to me in a way that makes me want to have sex with her.
Right.
Because that would be wrong. So it's definitely not about the fact that I think every woman owes me attractiveness, when in fact, often it's about the fact that men think every woman, and hashtag not all men, but where, the patriarchy feels that women owe them attractive by their standards.
Right.
And so there are lots of ways that men have tried to make that happen and control that. And, some of them have been talking about for your health, or, because you'll never get a man, or because, in some cases, maybe it's what God says you should do. Like, we have to be really careful with how the patriarchy mixes in with spirituality, mixes in with, the messages that we get about health.
Yeah. Well, there's also the fact of ableism too. The whole health conversation really intersects with a lot of different streams. And, I know several of my friends really who are disabled in one way or another. And the whole health conversation never really takes into account, people's abilities, whatever they are.
Right. I think it's important to know that health is not an obligation. Nobody owes anybody else health or healthy habits by any definition. It's not a barometer of worthiness. It's also not entirely within our control. Health is multidimensional, right? And so we have this idea, especially in the United States, it seems like that, like we're in complete control of our health. If we just do the right things, we'll all be super healthy. And that's just not the case, right? It includes genetics and access and environment and past behaviors, the effects of which can't be mitigated, and current behaviors and all kinds of things, right? And so like when we realize that, then when we look at the way that we sort of apply, like one of the things I hear pretty often that I find really disturbing is, well, it's okay to be big as long as you're healthy. Right. But that like, if you become unhealthy in some way, it's a weight loss time. Right. And like, that's really problematic, both because we haven't been able to show that weight loss is possible, but also because there are literally no studies in which weight loss has led to better health. Like that whole thing, that was what blew my mind. I came to Health at Every Size and Size Acceptance through the research. I went to school for research, and I was looking for the best diet, the diet that was going to work the best.
Right.
And, that's where I found out that there was no study of weight loss where more than a tiny, tiny fraction of people had been successful. But I also found out that there was never a study that showed that people who are able to lose weight long-term are healthier than they would have been, had they just been fat and practiced healthy habits. And in fact, Manan Tomiyama in 2013 did a study and found that, in fact, people who had maintained weight loss were not healthier for having done the weight loss, right? And so, it, again, comes down the hardest on people who are disabled, right? Especially fat and disabled, because now there's that outward sign of oh, this is why you're disabled and it's your fault and that's my business, right? So if you take the escalator and you're fat, it doesn't matter why, it's obviously because you're fat.
Right.
I've got a really good friend who gave me an interesting perspective on this. He got sloppy drunk and he crashed his motorcycle into a tree and he lost his leg.
Wow.
And so he is a super cool guy. He is really active and he tests out new prosthetic legs. So he's forever breaking them, coming back, it's filled with water, it's filled with sand, it's snapped off the foot, all these different things with his legs. And they keep giving him new legs. Right. And we were talking about the way that fat disabled people are treated. And, he's look, my accident is entirely my fault. He's but nobody ever wanted to blame me for it. He's and when I say it's my fault, they say, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. These things happen, whatever. It's all about living your life. It's all about helping you. And so he's and here I am, breaking all these expensive prosthetic legs and they just keep giving me new legs. Right. It's but when a fat person goes in for knee surgery, they say, why bother giving you, a new knee because you're just going to ruin it anyway because you're fat.
Right.
And so he gave me this really interesting perspective. But yeah, I think that it so gets wrapped up in ableism, and you see someone complaining about a fat person on a scooter at Disney World. Oh, right. How dare they use the mobility assistance they need to enjoy this park like I am? That person should stay home and live miserable, and that'll be the very best thing for them.
Yeah. And, just from a general person-to-person level, it's why is it their business anyway?
Right.
I mean, you don't know people's stories unless you talk to them, and sometimes people don't want to talk to you about their story. Right.
Which is not your business. So it is really interesting. I think that I was on a show called Alberta Primetime, and this personal trainer who's sort of their Biggest Loser guy was on. And he was complaining that the world makes it too easy for disabled fat people to get around. They've got scooters, they've got escalators, oh my gosh, it's just too easy. And I'm the way that that the world isn't too easy for fat people is that somebody on national television is happy to say that fat people shouldn't be able to navigate the world. We should make it harder for them to navigate the world. Right. And I think, disabled people, whether they're fat or not, face so many obstacles, because our world is just not set up properly to deal with people of different abilities. And so my thing is let's public health isn't about making someone's disability your business. It's about making the world as friendly as it can be to people with various disabilities, regardless of why they have them. And so I'm where's the compassion? Why aren't we how can I build a ramp? How can I get scooters to people who need scooters, rather than how dare that person need a mobility aid to navigate the world? It's just incredibly sad.
Yeah. And that dovetails back into spirituality. Because, a lot of the insurance conglomerates, I know Kaiser out here has been really big on it about, the mind, body, spirit connection. Yet, we still have medical practitioners, clergy, healthcare workers. I could go on, still, discriminating against people of size, and actually both ends of the spectrum. Because I know even my cousin who's this tiny little thing, but she has Raynaud's disease and she just has the genetics of being really skinny. She'll get crap from the doctors too. And it's just how are we working? How, we're doing body, meh, but how are we getting mind and spirit working there? Because if we're using the language of the diet industry, if we're promoting the values of the diet industry and of discrimination, how are we really helping the spirit and the mind?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the really dangerous message, and like you see it, I haven't watched The Biggest Loser for so long, but when I used to sort of be able to stomach it for blog fodder, they would always do a thing where, like, when they had lost a certain amount of weight and maybe lost a couple clothing sizes or whatever, they would bring out new clothes and people would put on the new clothes and they would say things like, I can finally love myself, and I finally think I deserve to date. And it seems to be that message, like, well, you'll hold on that whole liking yourself thing until you're thin and then you'll deserve it. Mm-hmm. And I think it does such a disservice, whether or not someone's going to try to lose weight, to suggest like, oh, well, hate yourself for your own health and, well-being. And then, when you become thin, in addition to all your other life problems being magically solved, you'll also be able to like yourself and have a good spiritual connection. Like, it's really, really problematic.
Yeah. And, to be blunt, that's crap.
It's totally crap.
And, I don't know if you, I don't think you know this, but, and I don't think a lot of other people that are my listeners or people I know even know it, but I have myself dealt with eating disorders like I know you have. And, and I know that they're trying to make a spectrum now for the eating disorders, just outside of strict anorexia and strict bulimia and all that. And I kind of fall in that spectrum. And, I know the spiritual damage it's done to me because, the voice in your head is much more hard on yourself than anybody else can be. And, I remember, you going through like, I shouldn't eat today because people are going to think I'm a fat slob. Mm-hmm. I remember going to that. And it was really weird. I kind of psyched myself out by going by myself to restaurants and eating publicly to try and mitigate that.
Yeah.
And it's a hard road to really love yourself and your body in this society.
Yeah, for people of any size. I mean, it's incredibly profitable if they can make us hate ourselves and believe that buying a product will help. Mm-hmm. Right? My friend C.J. Laguerre says that it's about giving them our self-esteem and then they cheapen it and sell it back to us at a profit.
Right.
And I think it's like not surprising because we get tons of messaging about this all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. There'll always be something else, right? It's like, so, I try to lose weight, so I give the bullies my lunch money and I hope they'll stop beating me up. But that's a pipe dream. They're going to beat me up about something else, especially now that I've shown them that I'll go ahead and give them my lunch money under enough pressure.
Right. And the difficult part of that is, knowing that and knowing that you don't want to contribute to this industry and yet allowing people the freedom to go ahead and do what they want to do with their bodies, and including doing the things that, like I might disagree with as far as dealing with their body. Yeah.
So for me, like my work is entirely about providing options. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think like I hear every day from people who hated their body because they literally didn't know there was another option.
Right.
They were dieting to be healthy because they literally didn't know there were other options to health. And so my work is always about like, I want people to know all the options that are available to them. And then I want to respect the choices that they make. Mm-hmm. Right. And so on my blog, we call it the underpants rule.
Right.
That I'm the boss of my underpants and you're the boss of your underpants. And like, there's no underpants overlord.
I quote that frequently.
Excellent. It makes me, I see it now like come up and it's like kind of a little thing and it makes me happy every time I see somebody say the underpants rule. But I think like the thing that helped me sort of understand this, because we've got this idea of like, oh, well, we treat fat people this way because like they're not prioritizing their health.
Right.
And that's an interesting argument until you look at it like any little tiny bit. Right. Because I watched the Winter Olympics and there's this sport called skeleton. Mm-hmm. And it's like luge, the guy who goes or girl who goes down the ice and the sled. Right. Except skeleton is face first.
Right.
80 miles an hour, face first down an ice chute.
Yeah, it always makes me go, ah.
And not like to bring medicine to underprivileged people. Like we're just going to jump up and wave a flag and hope we win.
Right.
This does not prioritize health. Mm-hmm. Right. There are so many people who we celebrate who do not prioritize their health. Rock stars, the tours that they go on, even if they're, trying their best, just the lack of sleep and the travel, that does not prioritize health. Right. So it becomes a really slippery slope. And I find that the people who want to tell me how to prioritize my health and the path that I should take to get there typically don't want someone telling that. Mm-hmm. it sort of becomes like driving, where like anyone who drives slower than you is an idiot, and anyone who drives faster than you like is a danger to society, but you're just right.
Right.
And some people do health the same way. Like anyone who's less healthy than them is, lazy and a slob. Anyone who's who does more healthy things than them is a health nut, and they're just right.
Right.
And like, it's fine to believe that, but it's not actually fine to then go out and act like it's true.
Right.
So like this is, I think it comes down to like who gets to be, the decider of health. Like if people who eat raw foods vegan can present information that like if everybody was raw foods vegan, that would be the best for society. Do we all have to do that?
Right.
Or if paleo people present evidence, like do we all have to go paleo? Or maybe should we just give people all the information that we can and let them make their own choices? Like I think that ultimately is where it ends up being best. And so I think that whole, we have to treat fat people poorly for their own health just doesn't hold the water at all, nor does they're obviously not prioritizing their health and therefore deserve to be, constantly berated.
Right.
Even if you believe that that's true, it still doesn't justify the behavior.
Right. And, and it's like, okay, free will. I mean, the pagan traditions, especially my Wiccan side, and, even to some degree on the Christian side of things too, people talk a lot about free will and that you have free will to do this and that and do your magic path, blah, blah, blah. And yet, there's a lot of people. And there was a prominent pagan blogger who brought out the whole fat trope thing. And it's just like, who are you to, are you like the more enlightened one because you've done XYZ and, who are you to tell people what to do, especially in traditions that are very autonomous and very much wanting to be independent and free thinking and etc.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like in the article that I wrote, I talked a lot about Christianity because that was where it seemed like they were selling the programs. But I do notice across spiritualities that tendency to equate a thin body with a more spiritual body, where people practice yoga as spirituality. There's a lot of that in pagan tradition. And I know the article that you were talking about because I remember reading it. They were talking about pagan size and, how we have to stop this and we have to give ourselves a better name by being thin.
Right.
Right. And a lot of it, I think, becomes talking about like, try to solve social stigma through changing ourselves. Right. Which isn't, to me, a particularly spiritual practice, right? Like if people are being stigmatized, then the problem is those who are doing the stigmatizing and the stigma, not the people who are being bullied, right?
Yeah.
And so, within those traditions and like, especially pagan religions and Wiccan religions, especially here in the United States, have a strong social justice history.
Right.
And so it seems odd to me that they've got this blind spot when it comes to body size. And I'm going in a couple days to SUNY Portland to represent a program about size diversity on campus.
Oh, very cool.
Right. And the first thing that I have to do is explain that size diversity is a real thing. And the size oppression is a real thing, and whenever I present this program, this is an issue that people don't think of it that way. And as we start talking about it, like they see it, but it's not seen as part of like, as a queer woman, whether or not a place was friendly, like the fact that, queerness was an element of diversity of the campus was never in question.
Right.
Even when I was in college in the mid 90s, but as a fat woman, I'm treated totally differently. I was at an Ivy League university and giving a talk in a room where I couldn't fit in the seats.
Right.
And when I brought that up, they were like, oh, there's like a table up in the back. And I was like a fatty holding area. I'm like, does this university encourage their students to sit in the back? And so, even within spirituality that has a strong social justice idea, sometimes still we don't see size oppression as a social justice issue. And I think that is, it's sort of the first hurdle to clear.
Well, that was even in seminary, and because the classrooms at my seminary have very horrible seating. And, one classroom had seats that were both, those tables with the attached chair.
Oh, the word. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Thankfully, some of those sets actually had a chair that detached and would move. And, but they were the most uncomfortable chairs, I swear. And then, the other building, not only did it have very uncomfortable chairs that didn't fit bigger people well, they also did not have an elevator for the second floor.
Wow.
And some of that is building codes because it's hard to modify the building. So they actually don't have cost as much on the second floor. They try to make it, they try to do their best.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I complained about the chairs once and nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was like, well, we have this one chair that you can use if you want it. It's like, what if I'm not the only person in the room?
Yeah. Or what if somebody takes the chair? Because like everybody wants the comfortable chair.
Right.
I've heard from college students, like I know a law student who said she has to take her tests on the floor. Wow. Because she doesn't fit in the desks in the testing room. And they were like, no, sorry, like you don't qualify as disabled, so we don't have to make an accommodation.
Right.
You know, or I know of fat people who have had accommodations made for them, but other people come and take the comfy chairs at the desk. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, they're trying to kick classmates out of the chairs and they refuse. Professor doesn't want to get involved. You know, it's a problem. And I feel like, you know, going sort of back to churches and spirituality and social justice, like that's a community that could be leading the way in this, you know, making sure, first of all, that the churches are comfortable.
Right.
You know, a friend of mine goes to a mega church that has like that sort of theater seating. And she's a fat woman with wide hips and she is in excruciating pain sitting in the seats, but she's afraid to say anything because she's afraid that they'll condemn her for her body size.
Right.
You know, and so she every day like smushes herself. And then when she gets up, she's like SpongeBob SquarePants, you know, she's all smushed.
Right. Right.
And so like that simple thing of like, why don't we want people to be comfortable in the church? And why would we create an environment where people are too terrified to ask? You know, for a simple accommodation, so the place they come to worship and be fed every week isn't excruciatingly painful.
Right. And, you know, and then you got, you know, organizations and denominations pushing their clergy to promote health. And yet they're pushing their clergy so hard because of the nature of the job that they also don't prioritize their health, you know, like we were talking earlier. And, you know, and then there's all these articles of like, oh, obesity epidemic among clergy, blah, 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 or, you know, bad health outcomes among clergy, la, la, la. And it's like, well, you know, do you know what a pastor's job is and how much little time they get to themselves? I mean, the way I'm working now, because I do most of my stuff online, it's practically a vacation for most clergy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of that is it's part of a greater societal thing where if we use body size as a proxy for health, then we get to be super lazy, put all the responsibility on individuals and not talk about the ways in which our society doesn't allow people to actually prioritize their health.
Right.
And so it becomes, you know, a big blame game. It becomes really easy and it becomes, you know, cheaper.
Right.
In the outcome. And so like if you look at Matheson and all did a great study and they found that if people practiced 4 simple habits, they had sort of the same health outcome regardless of size. Right. So they found if people didn't smoke, they drank in moderation, they ate about 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and they got about 150 minutes of movement a week, then regardless of their size, their health hazard ratio was at about a 1. Right. And so, but like, just giving people the opportunity to do those 4 things, like they call them, these simple habits, but it's not simple if you don't have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. It's not simple if you don't have money. It's not simple if you don't have transportation. You know, I talk a lot about safe environments for movement. Right. And I don't just mean physically safe, although that's important. Like it's incredibly frustrating when I see, well, in my day, kids went and played in the yard. Like, or on the streets or whatever. Like in my day, they did that too, but we don't all live in Mayberry. So can we please be realistic? Yeah. You know, so first of all, physically safe places for people, but also psychologically safe. My last marathon, I was in a training walk and people threw eggs at me, you know, and yelled obscenities at me. Yeah. It was like car pulled up and they yelled, "Yo, fat." And I was like, oh, that's probably me. So I look and all of a sudden these eggs come flying at me.
Oh my God.
For real. You know, and when I posted about it on my blog and people came forward, oh, this, you know, happens to me all the time. And I mean, as in my marathon training, I was constantly mooed at, people yell stuff out of their cars, like whatever. But like the egg thing was like a new level. Right. Of not being physically safe. And so like the idea of like, well, we want fat people to exercise, but preferably in their homes with the blinds drawn and under a blanket. Right. So we don't want to see that. Right. And so there's this whole culture where we're doing, it seems like everything we can to keep people from prioritizing their health. Right. And especially pastors, you know, not a lot of free time, tons of stuff to do, high level of stress, all of these things, none of them contribute to health. And there are things that can mitigate that, but we'd have to actually take some steps.
Right.
Or we'd have to actually give people free time. We'd have to actually give them different things. And so, isn't it just easier to say, well, it's obviously your fault that you're not healthy, so we'd rather publish an article about how you're not healthy and demand that you lose weight. So I think,
or you didn't make it a priority, or you didn't prioritize it right. And it's like, well, when?
Exactly. And people are expected to work longer and longer hours. They're expected to be tied to their work through iPhones and Blackberries and email all the time. We've got this culture that does everything that we know deprioritizes health. And then we've decided that instead of actually changing what we do, we'll just blame people for the outcome,
Right. I'm hoping that as we move on, more and more spiritual leaders will realize, be aware of what they're doing. I actually did a workshop at PantheaCon. I don't know if you're familiar with PantheaCon at all. It's a big pagan convention in San Jose in February every year on President's Day weekend. And I actually did a workshop where I showed examples of body shame, body stigmatization, and people were just amazed. They're like, wow, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I hadn't really thought that, what we say has that much of an impact. And I was like, well, yeah. And if you're a spiritual leader, you're working with somebody's spirit. And I've been through abuse through a spiritual leader, and it's devastating. And I've mentioned it before on previous episodes that it's completely devastating. And then you're sitting there thinking that God hates you because you're bad, you're fat, you're ugly, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility is an old adage, but it doesn't make it any less true. And so I think when you sign on, to help people on their spiritual journey, then it's imperative that you take a very high level of responsibility. And, again, another old adage, but first do no harm should apply to clergy as much as it applies to, medical professionals. That, if your job is to help people with their spiritual relationship, step one, don't damage their spiritual relationship. At the most basic level, we've got to get that done. And then it's what else can you do? But to make somebody believe that God hates them or God thinks that they don't honor them because of their body size, I think is, bordering on criminal in terms of if it's your job to help people with a spiritual bond with a higher power with God, and so, that I think that it absolutely does end up amounting to abuse. And I think part of it is, that spiritual leaders are part of a society that gives them this message. They've gotten the same messages that everyone else has, and so you see a lot of these programs, these that I wrote about in the article, they started when the pastor lost weight. Right. And so then they give that the fat confessional speech that we all love so much. Well, I saw somebody on TV, I was 20 pounds overweight. I couldn't even go upstairs. And I'm like, really? Try some squats. But this idea of but then I lost 20 pounds and everything was great. And everyone gives them so much positive feedback. And so they want that for their congregation. Right. And so I think that it, part of it is that they're buying into a system. I was, as you mentioned, I dealt with an undereating disorder, and I was also it's called currently called eating disorder not otherwise specified. Right. Yep. Because I wasn't able to become thin enough to qualify. Right. For any of the other eating disorders, right? Even at the low body weight and low body fat, I have, proof that my skeleton weighs more than my quote unquote ideal weight, right? Right. But I was never so praised ever in my life as when I was losing that weight. Never did I have so much societal approval, and never was I less respectful to my body, to my spirit than when I was doing that. Right. Exactly. Right. But people feel like they know better than you. What is honoring your body, what is honoring God or your higher power. And so they're again underpants rule. Yep. A big part of what fat people deal with in our society is being told that we're not the best witness to our experience.
Right.
Right. So we say, no, like I dieted, and though I maintain my diet behaviors, like I gained the weight back, and people are like, nope, you had to go back to your old eating habits.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody will say, well, I don't, I eat as much as my sister, but I'm much fatter than her. And somebody's like, you just think you eat the same, so it's this idea that like, because of your body size being fat, like you're no longer the best witness to your experience, including spiritually.
Right.
Right. So you're like, nope, I honor my body. I honor my higher power by honoring my body. And they're like, nope, nope, nope. Like if you were really honoring God, you'd be thin.
Yeah. And it just doesn't work that way.
Not at all.
I mean, it just boggles my mind because, a lot of body size is through genetics. And that's a gift from God, at least in my point of view. That's a gift from the gods. The gods made me this way. I'm a big woman. Most of the women in my family are big women. That's just how God made my family. And it just boggles my mind. It's like, you can't honor people for honoring themselves. You have to tell them that they must lose weight or they need a sandwich or,
Right.
It's like, can't you just be happy for them? And it kind of goes into other things where it's just like, my witchcraft or my Christianity is better than yours because of X.
Right.
And I find in the progressive community that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just like, why are we eating our own this way?
Yeah. Yeah. I call it sort of high priestess syndrome within the pagan and Wiccan. Like all of a sudden, like high priestess used to be a thing that was a job during a ritual. And now it's like an identity, and it's my Wicca is better than yours. My paganism is better than yours because I am now a high priestess of the whatever. Right.
Right.
And so I think that in a lot of spirituality, like we start out with a really good idea of like, oh, we're going to honor God. We're going to honor the higher power. Like it's going to be awesome. Like I've got a barn and you've got a cot, like some clothes, like let's go do this. Right. But then it becomes about like, oh, our religion is better than your religion for these reasons, or my practice of the spirituality is better than your practice of spirituality for these reasons. And then it becomes like trying to find ways to be better. And that's, again, where we draw on what are the prejudices that our society has and how can I use those?
Right.
Right. So, because I'm thinner, obviously I'm more honoring because thinner is better because that's what I learned, from society since when I was a baby, and
or this is the picture of the goddess that I see.
Right.
And she's skinny, voluptuous, whatever, and it's like that's your version of the goddess, not mine.
Yeah. And it definitely works, both ways. Like you'll see, the Venus of Willendorf, and then it'll be like, oh, well, I have the body of that goddess. Right. So that's how bodies are supposed. And then you get ridiculous things like, men don't like bones. They like meat, which like makes
I hate that.
Dogs and need dog food. And I don't feel like that works out. Like I want to be the best dog food that I can. Does not seem like an empowering message. Right. And so it's this thing of like honoring diversity seems like it should be the simplest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And yet, like, we just can't seem to get it done. Right. So in so many churches, in so many different ways, like the way that they often treat queer people or trans people or fat people or, in some cases, poor people, Some Catholic nuns got in trouble for being too busy helping poor people that they weren't doing enough against abortion.
Right.
Right. And they were like, I was just reading the Bible and I just noticed that there's a lot of helping poor people in there and thought it was good,
Yeah, but both Old Testament and New Testament.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing, start to finish, like whatever version you happen to have, there's still like a lot of helping poor people as like a thing. Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, I feel like if we could, as within spirituality and outside of it, just in, in our culture and society, if we could start honoring diversity and not having to be better than somebody else, but honoring like we're all cool for different reasons, like we would go so far, so fast, toward the kind of society we want to have. But somehow we just keep getting stuck back in that, like, I'm a better Wicca than you. I'm a better Catholic than you, like whatever.
I have a better body than you.
Right. Yeah.
It's, it boggles my mind and, I also can see where it comes from because I know I'll get, we have those old tapes because we learn it from the cradle.
Yeah.
And I know I'll sit there and I'll be like, who does she think she is? Or, it'll play in my head and I'll be like, dude, wait, back up the boat. No. Okay, radical inclusion. Right.
Right. Come
on, brain, work with me.
Right. I do not have to understand you to respect your choices. Like, you can go ahead and make choices that I don't even have a frame of reference for understanding, and that is okay.
Right.
Right. Like, it just doesn't seem like, my right to punch ends at the tip of somebody else's nose. Right. So as long as I'm not going beyond that, as long as someone else is not going beyond that, like, I don't get to judge that. But it can be really hard. I was at a spiritual retreat where we had to do an exercise, and for a full day, every thought that we had all day, we were supposed to stop and ask, is that thought mine? Does that serve me? Do I want to keep that thought? Right. And it was kind of excruciating. I mean, it was a long day, right? But it really, really did help reframe, like, oh, wow, like, I have so many of these things and I don't believe these things, or I've bought into them, and again, there's a privilege to neurotypicality, right? Like, I don't have to deal with mental illness. Right. And so this is for me, and obviously doesn't apply to everybody, but for me, I figured out, like, I'm the only one who gets to decide how I feel about my body. Right. Right. And that was a radical thing that came out of that workshop for me. Because, like, I can take other people's thoughts and feelings into account if I want, but, like, nobody can get in my head and make me feel any way about myself. Like, that's on me. And, like, that wasn't the last step. It was definitely just the first one. Right. But it really did sort of help me reframe that conversation for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to do the same thing. It's basically kind of recognizing the thought and going, whoa, okay, wait. No, we're not going to think this way. We're going to think this way, and we're just going to leave people alone. Yep. Let them do what they need to do.
Yeah. It makes me think kind of those, like, people of Walmart photos.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what are we doing? Like, really, you, in your, limited amount of time on Earth, you thought it would be good use of your time to take a picture of someone who's wearing an outfit you didn't like, and then go home, upload it, and post it to the internet. Yeah. Right. And then so that people can make fun of a person that they didn't see, don't know, and have no idea their story. Right. Right. Up to and including, I felt like wearing this outfit today. Like, there's absolutely no reason to do this, but it's sort of our kind of part of the culture that I think the internet has brought, of, like, this, let's feel better about ourselves by finding somebody to just completely trash.
Yeah. I actually was mentioning, I mentioned this on my Twitter account, and somebody said to me, well, technically that's not illegal. And I was like, well, no, but it's a really nasty, creepy thing to do. Yeah. And it's being a jerk. Yeah. It's like, what are we, in high school?
Right. And, like, do we really want to lead our lives based on, like, what the law will allow? Like, right? Well, is this illegal? Like, is that my only consideration? Not like, is this moral? Is this empathetic? Is this compassionate? Is this, bringing good into the world in the spaces that I control? But no, like, well, but it's legal. I get that. Like, nobody said it wasn't legal. Like, yes, your free speech is protected. You're free to say whatever you want, but are you sure you want to say that? Right.
Like, and are you willing to take the consequences of what you say under freedom of speech?
Right. Which is a whole other thing, like, that freedom of speech does not equal consequence for speech. But yeah, I lost a really good friend because she posted one of those people of Walmart, and I, messaged her, and I was like, I don't think this is okay, and this is why, and, like, I'm not comfortable. And she defended it, hugely, like, viciously defended it. And I was like, all right, like, good luck to you, but you are not someone I want to be friends with. Yeah. This cannot pop up on my Facebook page again. It is not okay.
Right. I've done that with a few people myself, and it's just kind of like, wow, some people I've just never really knew.
Yeah. Yeah. And interestingly, she's an incredibly spiritual, or describe herself as an incredibly spiritual person. Mm-hmm. And I was like, how does this, fit in? Like, I don't understand when you talk a lot about compassion, and, and she was just like, this person was asking for it because she dressed like this. And I'm like, are you serious right now? Like, again, patriarchy, again, victim blaming, again, rape culture, again, all of it. Right.
And you're like, what? Wait. You, 1 minute you're saying namaste, and then the next minute you're tearing down somebody because what she's wearing. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, it boggles my mind sometimes, and I look at the world, and sometimes I just have to walk away from Facebook because it's just kind of like, oh, no. Yeah.
So I think proactively, one of the steps we can take, is and again, always just a suggestion, but to really start to take control of the spaces that we control online, like our Facebook. Right. So like my Facebook is a size acceptance space.
Right.
And so when people talk about like, well, I mean, I believe in size acceptance, but I also want to lose weight, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it's fine for you to want to lose weight. I totally support your choices, but you can't talk about it here.
Right.
Or like, you have the right, it's legal for you to post these people of Walmart pictures, but you can't do it here.
Right.
And so I think kind of proactively, it's something that at least for me has helped me to feel like I'm making sure that my space is a space that, not my space, that my Facebook is a space where, I created this space that exists because I made it, and I try to make it into the kind of space that I want it to be.
Right.
By having some rules and having some requirements for people who post there.
Well, I also do that in real life too. I've had to have some friends where, okay, this is a boundary because I have certain triggers around weight and weight issues that we need to have. And, it's been pretty awesome because with most of the people, they're pretty respectful of my boundaries. But, it's really hard because it's like you can't run away from the societal stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're absolutely bombarded with it. I did a little like informal thing where I counted the number of negative messages I got about my body and, in a 24-hour period, and I extrapolated to a year, and it was about 370,000 negative things based on that 24 hours that I would hear in a year.
Right.
Right. And so it's constant. And yeah, I think boundary setting is so important. And I tend to use a 3-step system wherein I state what I need, and then I state a consequence that I can live with. Because one of my things is I don't try to control other people's behavior. So I don't say, you can't talk about that. I say, if you talk about that, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
Right. So like, it's not okay to talk about my body size at Thanksgiving.
Right.
If you do that, I will leave and we can try again next year.
Right.
Right. And I have found that, and with myself and with other people who've tried it, like usually it only takes once. Right. Because people learn, oh, like, you're serious. Okay. Like it's not, I don't set up, consequences I won't follow through with. And I'm, like this is important to me. But yeah, I think however people do boundary setting, I think it can be really important and also really empowering.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know I've found it so.
I mean, I talk a lot about like my body and me as separate entities, which doesn't jive with a lot of people's spirituality, which is totally cool.
Yeah.
For me, what I found was that I treated my friends a lot better than I treated myself.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, right.
Yeah,
so I was like, if I think of my body as a friend, then I make better decisions for my body. And so I kind of think of us as a team. Right. And so because sticking up for yourself can be really hard, but sticking up for your friend, like I would never have let my best friend be treated the way that I allow myself to be treated.
Right. Right.
Ever. Like if anyone ever treated him like that, I would be on top of and all over that. Right.
Absolutely.
And so when I think of my body as a friend, and I think of all the things that my body does, from like breathing, blinking, waist management, heartbeat, just little growing of the fingernails, all the things, then it's really much easier for me to stand up for myself, stand up for my body.
Right.
From wherever it's coming from, and also to have like little mantras. Because I mean, as we talked about, like clergy, spiritual leaders, family, friends, doctors, random people on the street have all gotten this message, a message that the diet industry has perpetuated and have become very good at perpetuating. Right. Right. To the tune of $60 billion a year. And they've got all kinds of people who don't work with them just parroting and regurgitating their message.
Right.
And so I think it's important too to have a way to be like, oh, like you still don't get it. Right. Right. Like, so when somebody comes at you about your body, whether it's a clergy person saying, like it's not honoring God to have a fat body, that however you react to that verbally, that in your head, you have that moment of like, oh, you don't get it. Okay. Right. Like, I see where you're at. Like, you're not there yet. And that's okay. Like, you're in your journey, but like, it doesn't have to affect me.
Right.
And to me, like those little mantras have been incredibly helpful just because of how often I'm bombarded with messages.
Yeah. I mean, and I do the same thing, and it's hard sometimes because, my brain will go into the, well, I don't really believe it mode. But, it's saved my sanity, finding health at every size and things like that. For me personally, it saved my sanity around this issue. And, I'm still doing the work on it. The papers that I did last year is a lot about doing the work around my eating disorders and things like that. So it's been helpful to have that. And I think if clergy can switch to talking in that language, about the body, I think they'll do better service to their congregants and coven members and group members and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you want to talk about honoring your body as a spiritual practice, like that can be an amazing thing to talk about. It just goes wrong when you say, and the result of that will be the same for everyone.
Right.
Right. It will be the same body size for everyone. It will be the same behaviors for everyone when that's not necessarily true.
Exactly.
You know, like Matheson et al. Said 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, right? But for a lot of people, that's not, with different, gastrointestinal issues, like that's not good for them.
Yeah. Like I can't do that because of my issues around certain foods.
Totally. And that's totally, that's absolutely fine. So while I think research is interesting and something to look at and can provide, maybe some guidelines if people are looking for guidelines, it also isn't the end all and be all.
Right.
And I think that it's important too to be clear that like honoring your body might look different for lots of different people. When I was coming off of dieting and into health at every size, I did a thing called permission eating.
Uh-huh.
And it's a thing where like essentially you feel like eating it, you eat it. No restrictions. Yep. You keep eating it until you don't want to eat it anymore. Yep. And I had a friend recently who did this, and her therapist was telling her about it, and she said, "Oh, I can't do that. I'll eat all the ice cream." Mm-hmm. And the therapist is like, "Oh, well, then go to the store and get more ice cream." And she goes, "No, you don't understand. I will eat all the ice cream." She's like, people, across the country will not have ice cream because of the ice cream I will eat. Right. And her therapist is like, "Well, look, let's see. If there becomes an ice cream shortage at the Mason-Dixon line, we'll revisit this. But until then, eat the ice cream." Uh-huh. Right. And so like that at that time in my life was completely honoring to my body, and was helping to undo all of the issues that I had done. And it was also terrifying. Yeah. Right. Because I had that idea of like, I cannot be trusted to make decisions because like I was too big, then I was too little, and I couldn't ever kind of Goldilocks it in the middle. And I had done all this dieting that doctors had prescribed. And, so I was just like in this place. And so I think part of talking about honoring your body from a spiritual or any other kind of perspective is saying that will look different probably for everyone. Mm-hmm. Right. And instead of saying, as your spiritual leader, I also know what you should eat, which is another issue that I took up with these in my article, was that these are not trained professionals. And some of them picked very specific passages from the Bible. Some of them picked passages that were later specifically negated. Right. And sold, they sell supplements like to the tune of $200 a month that you can conveniently buy on a church website. Like, and I'm like, a couple of them had actually consulted with nutritionists, but many had not. And one, had consulted with Dr. Oz. Oh, God. Right? Yeah. And I'm like, this is not like, of all the people I might ever take nutrition from, Dr. Oz is lower on the list than a random person I meet like on a plane. You know what I mean? Yeah. So especially since he's been really publicly debunked lately. Right. Yeah. Yeah. When Congress tells you that you're a fraud, like really think about what you're doing. Like especially this Congress. Right. You have gone to a special place. Right. There's a special place for you. Absolutely. But yeah, so this idea that like, and I think part of that is, I don't think it's rampant, but I think some clergy members sort of overthink their role. Yeah. Like, well, if I am a spiritual leader, like perhaps I'm also a nutritional leader. And some clergy members get pushed to do it. Right. You've got to get your congregants to, lose weight and be thin. And like, you've got to start with yourself and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that if we could just take all of that away and talk about just honoring our bodies, from a spiritual perspective, there's a really interesting and cool conversation that could happen around that. Yeah, absolutely. And, I know I'm going to be, as part of my ministry, that's one of my biggest parts of my ministry is that I want to be doing that. So I might hit you up to help me with a workshop or two. Yes, please. Anytime. Yay. Awesome. I remember I grew up Catholic and I sort of now identify as one of those sort of amorphous spiritual, but not religious kind of. But I went, I was a music major in college, and one of our associate directors was a leader at the Metropolitan Community Church, which is a gay church. Yep. And I'm familiar. Yeah. So we went to play at like a holiday service or whatever. And I just remember because, being gay was absolutely not accepted in the Catholic churches that I grew up in. So I was like, a revelation, even though like this wasn't necessarily my church, wasn't necessarily my religion, just being in that space where it was like, this used to be hostile and it's completely opening and open, you know, and just this incredibly diverse crowd of people. And so like, I sort of am so excited for what you're going to do, because I feel like if you can create that, like, we don't necessarily have to have a fat church, but, you know, but like to have a place where it's like, I'm definitely not going to be fat bashed for an hour.
Right.
Like, it's so sad, but it would be such a profound thing. Like, I'm going to go out in public. I'm definitely going to have a seat that fits me. I'm definitely not going to be fat bashed. I'm definitely going to be supported on my path, whatever it is. Like, I am so excited for you to create that. I cannot even tell you.
Well, I mean, I'm doing that in my church right now because I came up with this idea through my Christian worship class because we talked about disordered eating in the Eucharist specifically. And I was like, well, what can I do to help people who have issues with food also still participate in the Eucharist and receive a sacrament of blessed something, you know, blessed by Jesus. And what I came up with is what my friends and I have called the tri-ritual now, where we do have a bread and liquid Eucharist. And usually what I do, especially for gluten intolerant people and people in recovery, it's usually some non-alcoholic beverage, usually grape juice, but sometimes water, and gluten-free bread. So we always do that. But then we also have a blessed oil anointing at the same time, where we bless the oil at the same time. Sometimes I'll make the oil right on the altar, and then people can come up and have that and be blessed. And, you know, usually I do a lot of body positive stuff with that too. Is like your body is beautiful in God's eyes, usually when I'm blessing people. And then we also do intercessory prayer. So people can go up and they can do whatever they want too. You know, you can have Eucharist, you can have the anointing, and you can do the intercessory prayer. You can do everything or nothing, and it's okay. And, you know, we explain that. We're like, you can do all three, you can do one, you can do two. You can do nothing at all. And it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I remember a person of size coming up to me after one of the first times we did it in class saying, I have never felt so accepted in a church for my size. And I was just like, I'm going to cry.
I'm going to cry right now. That makes me so happy.
And it was amazing. I'm just like, this is why I'm a pastor, and this is why I'm doing this work.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's such a strong tradition in religion of like eating together, helping to forge bonds, like whether it's breaking bread or feast holidays or whatever. And like, I remember going to a church with a friend of mine. It was a Pentecostal church. And they did like, first of all, like nobody explained it to me. So it was like church forever, like not an hour, like Catholic church at 55 minutes. We're like,
yeah, I go to City of Refuge UCC, and it's a Pentecostal church too, and I totally understand.
Yeah, so it was amazing, and like people were leaving, and I was like, "Are they leaving?" And she's like, "Oh no, you have to take breaks. Like you can't sit here." Right. I was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen." Like people coming and going, and then afterwards they did fellowship. Right, they had this amazing sort of potluck situation. Everybody like hung out, and I was like, "This is so," because it was not like my church was like, you don't talk to anybody, like you hold hands during the Our Father, but you do it like begrudgingly, and it's a little weird. That's about it, yeah. And then you get out, you know what I mean? Like,
run away.
Right, totally. Like, and like if you know, when I was living in Pennsylvania, if the Eagles were playing, they'd like cut the sermon 15 minutes short to make it home for the game, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, like that sense of like eating and having community together. And so like, I just think like if people were like, oh, manna, like I couldn't possibly, you know, like this idea of food restriction and food shaming and how that affects sort of that aspect of spirituality, that breaking bread together, that, you know, and I love like the gluten-free Eucharist and stuff. Just like, again, how many people can we accommodate? There's a concept, I think it started in Unitarian Church, but I could be wrong about that, of radical hospitality.
Yep. It's in several different churches.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to miscredit it. But yeah, this idea of like, how can, like, let's be radically hospitable. Like how many people can we accommodate instead of being like all these people with their special requests, you know what I mean? So I really like that. Yeah. That idea. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. And you know, it's you do your best. And, you know, and part of, like I said, part of my ministry is making clergy aware, hey, you know, you really need to think about who's in your congregation. What are their issues? What are the issues they're coming with? And, I've been blessed with pastors and mentors that actually do think about that. And so, it's been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. Makes me, anytime I think, like people ask me about like religion, I'm like, I think anytime religion helps you treat yourself and other people better, it's great. Anytime it leads you to like judge people and judge yourself, maybe not so great. Like that's my entire spirituality can be sort of summed up in that. Like,
yep. I totally agree with you. Well, we are out of time. We're starting to run out of time, actually. So I would like to thank you. And where can people get in touch with you if they would like to talk to you or send you email or...
Sure. Well, first of all, just thank you not only for having me, but just for all the amazing work that you're doing. Like, I'm just super excited to get to be a part of your work. So thanks.
Oh, thank you so much.
And so I'm like kind of trying not to fangirl right now, but so yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, so my blog is DancesWithFat.org,
which will be in the show notes. You can
always find me there. And then my email is Ragen, Ragen, at DancesWithFat.org.
Okay.
So, and I I try to answer, I get 300 to 500 emails a day from people. So I try to answer, but I just want to set expectations. It can take a little bit. So,
and also I'll have a link to the Fat Activism Conference because we are doing this episode in conjunction with that. And it will come out the Friday of the start of the conference, which is August 21st? 22nd. Yeah, I'm getting my dates all mixed up.
It happens to me all the time. Yeah. I'm super psyched about the Fat Activism Conference. It's 40 speakers, 30 different workshops over 3 days. And it's a teleconference so people can listen from phone or on a computer. We wanted to try to create a conference that didn't have so many money barriers. Like you have to get there, you have to pay for the hotel, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so, it's fatactivismconference.com, and you can see all the speakers in the schedule. And we're also doing recordings because we know it's a lot of workshops.
Yeah, and early.
And early and late. Like we have people internationally, so we try to accommodate everybody by starting. Luckily, Jeanette, my co-organizer, Jeanette DePatty, she's from thefatchick.com. She's a morning person and I'm a night person.
So
perfect. Like the splitting up of the facilitation wasn't so hard. But yeah, so we're doing recordings so that people can listen on their own time if they can't get to all the workshops. But thank you so much too for promoting that. It's, to me, it's really important to help people have access to tools that can help empower them. And so that was the entire impetus of putting together this conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Gina. I really appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Ragen for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. There you can also subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, join our forums, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.